It's the 90s. Bill Clinton is the president. O.J. Simpson was just acquitted. This. And who could forget man-made horrors beyond comprehension? Analog horror. The latest horror obsession of the internet, filling the shoes of the sit-and-survive jump-scare games of the 2010s and the psychological horrors of the 2000s. But you, my uncultured viewer, might be asking,
but what is analog horror?
Hello, and welcome to the Lethal Entity Guarding Initiative of Toronto Organization. In this informational tape, we will discuss a new lethal entity that has arisen in the past 6 years. Analog horror. This new entity will be referred to as Ent-18. Ent-18 is a subsidiary anomaly of Ent-66, also known as found footage. The properties of Ent-18 include primarily being set in the 80s and 90s, using older analog technology, and making you question what it's like to be human.
As the informational tape from the legit organization stated, analog horror is an offshoot of the found footage horror genre, taking place within the world it created. The difference here is that analog horror focuses on analog technology, taking place in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, attempting to weaponize your nostalgia. The majority of analog horror series have a similar antagonistic entity, non-people. From fake people to alternates to mimics to thought forms to the locust. He's hungry and he wants in. Analog horror is also more psychological based and more subtle with its scares, attempting to keep you thinking about it long after viewing. But before we get to this guy, we are going to take a journey through the history of analog horror, starting with... To find our first analog horror, we have to turn back the clock in our time machines to the year 2009, when Obama was first inaugurated into office, Minecraft was released as cave game, and who could forget this underpass with this Michael Myers wannabe, also known as No Through Road, our first analog horror. No Through Road begins with the insignia for the Secret Intelligence Service, also known as the British Secret Service, followed by title cards. They say that on December 15th, 2008, 4 17-year-old boys from Stevenage were reported missing by their families. 2 days later, their bodies were found on Broomhall Farm, 10 miles outside of town, in their car. The uncut footage of their camera found in the car is provided in the hopes of aiding in the investigation. The tape opens with a bunch of British blokes mucking about, heading their way back home. We have Stephen, the cameraman, Ollie, the car's driver, James, the man in the shotgun seat / the navigator, and Dave, who is sitting next to Stephen. Occasionally, the video feed is interrupted by footage of other recordings. They eventually come across a sign that says, Broomhall Farm, private road, no through road. Stephen mentions that Broomhall was in the news recently, but he can't remember what it was for.
Broomhall Farm was in the news. I don't know what it was, I can't remember.
They drive through the underpass, but change their mind on driving down a private road. However, they have already crossed the threshold, and as you might be able to guess, yeah, they're not making it. They head down a different road and play with their headlights for a bit. One of the boys makes an interesting hypothetical.
There's like a bloke in the middle of the road. Oh,
stop saying that because it will actually happen.
They come across a guide sign for Bennington and Walten, which they say is nowhere near where they live. Everyone is getting more worried and accepts that they are now lost after they've driven down this road for an hour and James's phone and GPS have stopped working. They decide to take a rest stop, but during it they find a perfectly preserved rabbit lying on the side of the road. Once everyone's back in the car, Stephen decides to go back out and look for city lights. Instead, what he finds scares him, running back into the car and ordering them to drive away.
What's the matter, man? What?
He explains that he saw a man wearing a mask. After a bit more driving, they come across another guide sign. The same guide sign. They freak out for a moment as they haven't taken any turns, but they explain in a way that the road is probably just a circle around Bennington. They keep going, noting that it's probably been 2.5 to 3 hours by now. Presumably it's 7 to 7:30 a.m. Eventually, they do come across another guide sign, which is definitely going to be a different one and not the exact same... never mind. It's Bennington and Walten again. They attempt to see what's on the radio for any indication of where they are. Instead, all they hear is this. Now that's what I call good radio! The radio station quickly turns itself off, and they wonder what the radio station was. Soon after, they begin to question why they haven't seen another car for the past 3 hours. But luckily for them, after another fast forward, they finally enter new territory, coming across lights, a roundabout, a new guide sign for Stevenage this time, and another car. Can you believe that? They arrive in their hometown, finally, out of that... Wait, what? Why are the lights off? Well, gosh dilly darn it, we're stuck in a time loop. So remember when we kept coming across the exact same street sign, even though they never took any turns at all? Well, it seems that crossing that threshold has sealed their fate, as now they are in a time loop. The boys sit there for a bit before fate lends its hand. This entity stands there menacingly as they attempt to start the car. The entity warps the car around before reaching in to kill its victims. Steven tries to run away, but the killer runs him over with his friend's car. Once Steven is pinned to the ground, the killer bashes his head in with his own camera. The SIS then make a plea for people to turn over information that could aid in this investigation, providing a website link, thus ending this video. No Through Road 2. NTR2 opens with a new title card stating that, unlike last time, this tape has been released without permission. The tape begins with a car driving to a flower field where it is revealed that Dave and James had survived their encounter as they pay respects to Stephen and Ollie. After this, they discuss the tape and how Dave managed to escape. The day turns to the evening as Dave and James attempt to find where they got lost using the video from No Through Road 1. While driving, they talk about a new episode of Doctor Who, a two-parter titled Space and Time. The story is about Doctor Who meeting another time traveler, but only at different time periods, so each version that they meet is slightly different than before. The tape cuts further in time where they discuss how time travel might work. While talking, Dave cuts himself off to mention a dead bunny on the side of the road. After another cut, they're actually lost now, until they come across the entrance to the flower field again, accompanied by the guide sign to Bennington and Walten. They then realize that they're stuck in another loop again. They drive in circles before stopping at the entrance to the flower field to try and get the internet and their phone signal back. While they're talking, in the background, the masked man passes by their car and a few moments later banging is heard at the window. The camera cuts to reveal that Steven is still alive. He still has the wounds from getting the camera shoved in his face, but he's alive. Oh hey, look at that, foreshadowing. Dave tells Steven that they're stuck in a new time loop before the camera cuts to Dave comforting Steven in the flower field. The video ends, and a title card states that the tape was found in a camera bag along with a very broken camera, and another tape was being recovered from inside the camera. No Through Road 3. NTR3 is the shortest of the four at 2 minutes and 36 seconds. This is the first part of the tape that was being recovered from the previous episode. Although it has been restored, the audio and the visual quality still have some corruption. The tape opens with Dave, James, and Steven driving in circles around the time loop. Suddenly, Dave's phone rings, and he picks it up, only to be met with silence on a withheld number. Shortly after Dave puts the phone away, Steven begins apologizing for something that he got the others into, but the audio becomes too distorted to make out what he's saying. Once the car loops back to the flower field's entrance, Dave decides to take a right instead to see what happens, only for them to almost immediately get thrown back to the beginning of the loop. They then come across the masked man again, and stop. While they wonder what to do in this situation, Steven tells Dave to just run him over.
Drive.
Dave complies and hits the gas, but right before they hit him, they're transported back to the underpass. The video ends with a brief image of a symbol. No Through Road 4. The fourth and final episode in this series is the second half of the tape that was being recovered since episode 2. It opens with the same titles as the previous episodes, stating that it has been restored but the audio and visuals are crap sometimes. Dave, James, and Steven have crashed the car, and while standing around trying to figure out what to do, they see lights in the distance. They go towards it and find a cabin near the tree line, and no one seems to be home. The audio cuts out when they enter, leaving only visuals. The cabin is covered in odd garbage and many masks with writing all over the walls. And there's a cage next to a door at the end of the room containing something. They then decide to leave. Steven takes a mask with him, and Dave stands in silence for a few seconds. When they're heading back to their car, Dave theorizes that the writing on the walls was lines they said in a video. Steven asks what video he's talking about. The camera cuts to them hiding behind their car as the masked man is just standing in the archway. A car pulls up and stops. The man hums the looping song and the car's high beams turn on, and then the screaming from the first episode can be heard from inside the car. Seeing this, James runs away with a mask he took from the cabin. Steven then gets the idea to try and save himself, donning the mask that he took from the cabin in order to not be recognized by the masked man. He attempts to drag himself away from the scene, but when his past self tries running, Steven pins him down and beats himself with his own camera.
Wait!
When the mask falls off, Steven's eyes are whited out.
Steven.
And he runs away into the darkness. And finally, to close it off, Dave is caught out by the original masked man, identified by the hat. No Through Road had come in at a perfect moment in time, during a gap between the found footage juggernaut that was the Blair Witch Project and the later analog horror series that were to come. A time on YouTube where the content was still mostly family home movies, where a tape of improvised acting under the guise of police asking for help would all the more likely be convincing. No Through Road got the ball rolling. Now let's say who will boost his trajectory into popularity. Well, looks like I'm going to have to stop doing play-by-plays for a bit in order to release this on time. We will now move on to... The popularization occurred in 2015. Finally, in 2015, analog horror begins to get its own personality with the advent of Local 58. Local 58 is about... That's right! It's B, the moon! As we all know, the moon is a living and breathing organism. Local 58 takes place in the 2010s. That's current year, circa 5 to 14 years ago. In this series, we watch a variety of news broadcasting segments that I don't have too much time to get to in detail with, but the gist is this. We learn throughout these broadcasts that the celestial body that is our moon is actually a living and breathing creature that can interfere with analog transmission waves. And only analog waves as seen in the video digital transition, where when the studio transitions from an analog to a digital format, the original analog still lingers for a bit in the background, where the moon communicates with the audience and the news studio, calling us traitors. The timeline is as follows. The moon landing occurs a few decades earlier than it should have. This causes the moon to wake and begin interfering with Earth's analog signals. Over time, the moon increases its influence over Earth, causing anyone who looks at it to either die or start worshipping it. In contingency, it invades Local 58 to persuade everyone to kill themselves, passing it off as a defense against the enemy. Suggested methods to kill themselves include a recommended gunshot, trying to resist and being executed by the police, or by assuming the victory position where you lay flat on the ground outside facing the sky. It then goes on to encourage people to euthanize their little patriots. In other broadcasts, the moon tries to prepare the people for death by training adults to rid themselves of their dreams and to dissociate human faces. It also uses subliminal messaging. For the children, it provides a cartoon about a skeleton who is searching for a grave to die in as the moon watches. After coming across hyper-realistic skeletons of humans, this thing, and the abyss, which is actually just a hole into a cave, the skeleton then finds another empty grave in the cave and lies in it, assuming the victory position as the moon passes over him, killing him. Maybe the moon isn't a healthy thing. The series comes to a penultimate end with the video Skywatching. In Skywatching, a man films the sky, naming constellations before coming to the moon. He labels it as his throne. The camera zooms into the moon, revealing that it is of fleshy texture and appears to be breathing. The camera zooms back out and the moon dominates the night sky with its brightness. The man moves in front of the camera and the words "Rejoice" is placed on the screen. When the camera tries to focus, it is seen that the moon's southern hemisphere has blown open, giving birth to a new organism. Local 58 began to provide the personality of analog horror, making way for its presentation of in-universe programming, training tapes, found footage, and documentaries. Another big thing Local 58 did was coin the term analog horror, as seen in Station ID. It's safe to say that Local 58 really got the ball rolling on the popularization of analog horror, laying the groundwork for what we will talk about next. Actually, before that, let me make a quick addendum. Remember when I said that Local 58 caused the popularization of analog horror? Well, I lied! The popularization of analog horror was more of a ramp-up than one singular event, starting with Local 58 in 2015, Gemini Home Entertainment in 2019, and the Mandela Catalogue in 2021. I was going to talk about the latter two, but unfortunately... So now I'm going to have to move on to... The popularization of analog horror led to an explosion of new series, like The Monument Mythos by Mr. Manticore. The Backrooms by Kane Pixels.
Mr. Beck, may I ask where this subject came from?
And Greylock by Rob Gavigan.
I think I caught whatever's going around. My skin, it feels tight, a lot of pressure behind my eyes. My teeth feel like they're humming, vibrating.
Analog horror even spawned its own subgenre called FNaF VHS tapes, where it's regular analog horror, but it's heavily inspired by the game Five Nights at Freddy's, a previous popular classic from the Sit and Survive jump scare game era. FNaF VHS tapes started with FNaF VHS by Squimpus McGrimpus, and included classics like the Walten Files by Martin Walls and Harmony and Horror by Baddington. But for this section, I'll mostly be talking about
Dr. Nowhere's Office of Wonders.
Silas Orion, also known as Dr. Nowhere, is a, quote, 17-year-old failed experiment that makes perceivable content sometimes. Most of Dr. Nowhere's work is on his Instagram and Twitter, where he posts Trevor Henderson-style photos. But in this section, I'll be talking about his YouTube channel of the same name. On his channel, he has two analog horror series. There's T.O.E, starring this fun little guy, and the Boiled One phenomenon, with this flaming hot Dorito in a cloak. But before we get to that, let's talk about Starving.help. Starving.help is the shortest video in this series at 26 seconds long, in which this lanky black creature is attempting to break through the screen. And judging by the title, he seems very hungry. Nothing much else happens in the video, so let's move on to Love.thumper. Love.thumper starts with the world's calmest man asking our hungry little guy to please go away.
Please go away.
I'll be referring to this creature as the Locust from now on, as that's the name that appears on most of the wikis. After the man makes his request, the Locust then starts bashing the screen in from the inside in order to get to it, and makes its way into the house. Once the Locust is inside, we cut to a shot of the man hiding in another room as the volume of the tape gets turned down. This means that someone else is watching, as despite everything being silenced, a heartbeat can still be heard as the Locust stalks the door. The heartbeat increases as the Locust peeks its head around the door frame before finally rushing in to presumably consume its meal, as distorted music begins to play. This is followed by a shot of the room from Starving.help with broken glass and the words, "The body appeared untouched." Making.friends. Hey, wait a minute, I think this thing might be a child. The volume is turned up from the previous episode and a slideshow of children's drawings plays, talking about what a good child should be. That they wake up bright and early, play pretend, make friends, and that they don't play with their food until it's all gone. The Locust presumably made these drawings as many of them parallel the entity. After 46 seconds, a pulsating heart attached to the locust room interrupts the drawings and transitions to a screen recording of a chat room called Pen Palace. This advertisement is briefly replaced by a government warning before we enter in a chat log with a friend, Dominic9999, where he speaks with... I don't really think that's how normal people talk. Clearly, something has happened to Dominic as he only speaks in one-word sentences. And when he talks with more than one word, he uses periods over spaces, constantly fast-forwarding the conversation with okays and yeses, and begging for a voice call. Once his victim complies, the locust is seen on the voice call facing away and twitching in the corner before the wall heart from earlier comes in with the text, "None of it makes any sense. Everything inside was gone." For Dr. Nowhere, I'm going to analyze the creator as a whole rather than the series he's making. So I will cover T.O.E. and the boiled one phenomenon after I talk about... The boiled one phenomenon is the second analog horror that Dr. Nowhere created, and is also the shortest series in this video at 1 episode long. The boiled one phenomenon begins with a warning from an organization, called the Ephrata Branch, that the video contains mild to severe cognito-hazardous material that may mentally and physically affect the viewer.
What does that mean?
According to Google, a cognito-hazard is an image, pattern, sound, or any kind of sensory signal that directly causes harmful or undesired psychological or physical effects on the one who senses or perceives it. The video prescribes that the viewer gathers earplugs, a pencil, a sheet of paper, and a standard Christian Bible open to Psalms 91:10 to keep in their vicinity. It then says that if something unusual begins speaking in tongues tangible to the naked ear, the viewer should insert earplugs and turn to their pencil and paper and write the following on their sheet of paper. After the words are written, the viewer should then recite Psalms 91:10 aloud.
There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling.
If the memory of something unholy persists, pray. It is all you can do. After which, contact the authorities where you'll be amnesticized. Patients post-amnestic treatment appear to lead normal lives. The video then starts talking about a nature documentary from the late 90s that ended in 2001 after the death of its host. Then it says that 2 years later, in 2003, the 13th episode, which was about the poison oak, re-aired unexpectedly. During this re-airing, the broadcast would be hijacked by what the Ephrata Branch refers to as FEN 228. The video states that although most people remember FEN speaking in English, non-English speakers reported that they could still understand every word spoken. An image of an eye is also shown with a reverse Japanese text, which translates to the bird. The Ephrata Branch also states that the broadcast has been recovered but heavily edited to provide safety, while also suggesting to insert your earplugs and wear blue light glasses. Alright guys, I hope you're ready, let's go! Oh, I should have probably given you guys more time to prepare. That was broadcast 813. It was viewed by roughly 530 residents of southern Pennsylvania and left them all distraught. Aside from the discomfort and paranoia FEN's presence caused, there were also highly unnatural side effects, with many viewers reporting that they couldn't get the image of FEN out of their head, and some still hearing its voice days later. An anonymous victim reported that it felt like the face was living in his brain and feeding on his spine. Another reported hearing trumpets in their ears before they fell asleep. These symptoms were only the beginning of their suffering. In response to broadcast 813's airing, the Ephrata Branch cut power to the southern Pennsylvania area, with the outage ultimately spreading from New York to Michigan to Canada. Side note, this was an actual event that happened, the Great Northeastern Blackout of 2003, the cause of which being blamed on a squirrel and human error. Once the blackout had been initiated, the Ephrata Branch then wiped all instances of broadcast 813 from the media. 12 days after the broadcast was taken off the air, 509 people contracted locked-in syndrome.
What does that mean?
Locked-in syndrome, also known as LIS and pseudocoma, is when you lose all control of your voluntary muscles except for vertical eye movement. This is a very rare condition. With this massive influx of LIS cases, the USDA regarded it as a spectacle and put it under immediate government investigation. The commonality between these cases was that every victim was at home watching FN's broadcast at the time of airing. Though the victims were unable to speak, more than 60 individuals were interviewed via Morse code. Many of these interviews were unavailing, and many others held results that had to be archived or terminated. Later in the investigation, the Ephrata branch was notified of an odd case relating to an elderly World War II veteran by the alias of G.O.M.B. Zamperini. G.O.M.B.'s family was convinced that his house was haunted after an odd photo was taken by G.O.M.B.'s visiting grandson. Alright guys, this photo should be harmless to look at as long as you're more than 3 feet away and are wearing blue light glasses. Oh, wait, I did again. An Ephrata branch officer then interviews Mr. Zamperini about the unholiness that plagues his home. During the interview, Zamperini's Morse code is briefly replaced by red Morse code that is presumably Fen. It translates to, "No one but you and me." And the motivational wall text on the background slowly transitions from, "Give it away to God and go to sleep," to, "I can see you." After Job says that Lord Christ is with him, the Ephrata branch officer is then cut off by Fen.
Listen closely. Did I hear it?
Fen 228, the Boiled One, hijacks the instructional tape. Beginning with the title text, "Wonderful day, the miracle of birth, a fetal fanfare. Fear, the one and only Watanabe bird." The Boiled One gives his piece before being interrupted by the Ephrata branch, stating that Bravada 228 protocol has been initiated, and that it is no longer safe to continue viewing this tape, and that it will end shortly, before ordering you to perform the procedures given in the instructory portion of the video. Immediately. Finally, Psalms 91:10 is plastered across the screen before being cut short.
There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling.
Dr. Nowhere is mainly here because he's the most recent analog horror creator to get traction. And while others would be better for this section of modern analog horror, like Greylock, Vita Carnis, and maybe even Urban Spook. But I chose Dr. Nowhere because he is a, quote, 17-year-old failed experiment. He has achieved popularity. And what makes this even more notable is that this isn't the first time this has happened. If we remember back to what I said 1,741 words ago, the Backrooms, along with the oldest view, were made by another 17-year-old, Kane Parsons. And we all know how much the Backrooms blew up after Kane stepped in. Starting as a collaborative fiction project, Kane came in and turned the concept into a movie deal. Dr. Nowhere is part of a growing trend. Younger people are starting to enter the creative industry individually and finding success. But before we go into more depth on young creators, let's talk about... This would have been the part where I talk about my favorite analog horror, Vita Carnis. Unfortunately, time is running thin, which is a shame because I really like this one. Hence the name of this section, but I'm gonna have to move on to...
But what's the point?
The overall takeaway, dear viewer, is that I'd like you to watch these great shows. But more importantly, is that you should create. Now is the best time to create in all of history. All of the information and tools are out there. There is no skill floor. There is no age requirement. But there is, however, a need for passion. So make what you want to make. Make what makes you happy. And make something that represents you. Thank you for watching. If I had a nickel for every time a 17-year-old analog horror creator became popular really fast, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that happened twice.